I think
Yeah, I see it.
Good morning.
Good morning. My apologies.
Oh, no, it's nothing. So I would like to call the meeting to order and start with a salute to the flag of our country. We are recording. Thank you. And if we could just get the flag. Here we go. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Flag.
of the
United States of America.
the republic,
and to the republic
which it stands,
which it stands,
one nation,
one
nation,
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty.
liberty and justice
justice
for all.
for all.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome to our special meeting. This is conducted under Zoom, still under the governor's order permitting us to do this. This is a special meeting, means it's specific for a purpose. We actually have two items that are connected to each other. This special meeting is not for Deborah Hess's birthday today, although if we'd like to consider that, we can do that. So happy birthday, Deborah.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
So if I just
Happy birthday.
What a lovely way to spend the start of my day.
So, again, welcome everyone. That brings us to our request for budget adjustments. Our first item on the agenda, ED 11, Ms. Tarkington.
Yes, the first item, ED 11, is for the Board of Education, B 680108959560. The amount is $2,055,000. It is an interim appropriation for a collapse ceiling at North Myanna School.
Okay, and that item comes on behalf of, from our budget committee. Committee reports? Ms. Tarkington.
Yes. This is an interim request for damage at the North Myanna School due to a ceiling collapse on February 13th. The item was presented by Peter Bernstein, BOE Chair, Dr. Tony Jones, Superintendent of Schools, Sean O'Keefe, Chief Operations Officer, and Dan Watson, Director of Facilities. Megan Zanetsky, Director of Risk Management, provided a presentation on process and status of pending insurance proceeds for the accident. Mr. Watson shared that he requested town input, including recommendations for contractors for emergency demolition and rebuild, and for engineering, now including architectural consultation. Having spent operational funds towards cleanup, schools now requires additional funding for ongoing discovery, engineering, and repair. Its request, prepared March 22nd, was based on actual expenses for damaged areas, including emergency response and an estimate to rebuild damaged areas, preventative work for additional demolition, as well as other non-construction costs, and an estimate for architectural and engineering and construction. The actual expenses and estimates requested by schools totaled $8.1 million. The Budget Committee discussed the scope of the project, the timelines for A&E, town approvals, and construction. Questions were raised about temporary repairs to use the school until summer break. The concern on that alternative regarding liability appeared to take that option off the table. The Budget Committee discussed appropriating the entire $8.1 million or appropriating the current expenses and funds to continue work and to accomplish the A&E and building to code work to have qualified cost estimates. Discussed were concerns of any delays this might cause, especially with the upcoming RTM schedule and its May meeting reserved for the annual budget. Ultimately, a motion was made to appropriate $2,055,000 for current expenses, preventative work, including A&E funds, and non-construction. That motion was approved 3-0-1. Schools will return to the BET for an interim appropriation once actual scope and cost estimates prepared by a qualified estimator are known. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Tarkington. Discussion on the item. We will be using our blue hands as normal. Ms. Moriarty, your hand is up.
Yes, I see that we both have the chairman of the Board of Education and several members of the school administration with us at this meeting. If we can elevate them to be panelists, I think I'd like them to present updated information on the timeframe of the project steps, as well as the expected scope of the project.
Thank you. I gotta find them. You gave me a tough job there. I gotta go find them. That's,
Peter Bernstein's hand's raised.
yeah, thank you.
Dr. Jones is under D. And she can identify who else from the administration might be of assistance.
Hang on. Where'd Peter go? There's Peter. Okay.
Sean O'Keefe is also listed as Sean O'Keefe.
Thank you very much. Who did I miss? Who did I miss?
There seems to be somebody, Francis Alvarez. Are they supposed to be elevated to panelist?
No,
Or Francia?
I do not see, Dr. Jones, I do not see we have you, we have Sean. Who else do we need? We have Peter, right?
Right. Yes, Dan Watson is not with us today.
Oh, okay.
We already have.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah,
I'm
previous
sorry.
plan. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was looking for him. Okay, welcome. Good morning. Welcome to our special meeting. And if you have an update since our budget committee, please.
I might go ahead and just start. I want to make sure everybody did receive the memo that I sent out just a few days ago. And it's about 5 pages, but I think that the pages that are probably of the most interest, and again, it's just a fact sheet, is on page 2, which has the construction costs. This is very similar to what you've seen in the past. We added a little bit more detail just to help people understand based on some of the questions since the last time we met. The estimate to clean up and repair, for instance, the water damaged areas. I think there was some confusion about what cleanup and repair is happening right now. This is things like water damage, cabinetry, drywall, floor trim, and that is that very first estimate on the second bullet on that. I'm on page 2. Along with that, we have the estimate to demo the second floor. And when it says preventative, again, those are ceilings which were not damaged from the water. This is primarily the same construction as the ceiling that fell, causing a safety issue after the inspection. And so both of those bullets are the estimated for the first floor and then also the second floor. And then you'll see on that last bullet, it's estimate to rebuild all of the first and all of the second floor. And that's what's in that $5 million number. And, you know, when you look down at the bottom, FF&E, the security related replacements, transportation, those have not changed since the last time that we've met. But again, the all-in total for that was just at that 8.1 million. And we've just tried to provide a little bit more information. And also that these numbers are construction estimates, which is where we are right now, from Werner, which is a highly reputable construction firm. These are not numbers that just staff put together. So I think that's also really important to note. I might just have you look at page 3, which I think is probably more detail than what you saw last time for sure. Right at the top, it talks about the dates. We will have our RFP posted on April 28th. And I did reach out yesterday to Pistola, Kyle Pistola, who is the structural and civil design engineer, who's also working with the architect. And we will be ready to post on the 28th. So that's not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after. We will then have a walkthrough of North Myannis for those who are looking to bid on the project on May 5th. On May 10th, that's when they will submit questions from the contractors. And again, these are hard dates that we are publishing as part of the RFP. On May 13th, answers will be provided to those contractors. So we're going to work very swiftly. And bids will open on May 19th. So these numbers are new and updated information from when we met last time as we continue to refine and make sure we're moving this project forward as aggressively as we can. When you look at when the bids are open between May 19th and then May 20th, which is reviewing the bids, May 21st, notify the awarded bidder, May 24th, issue the contract. That could also be compressed depending on how many bids we get. So when we open the bids on May 19th, let's say we only have 2 companies who've put their information forward. It's much faster to review than if we end up having, for instance, 10. So this schedule is set so that we could have several, and it gives us a day or so to do the work. The biggest gap that we have in this schedule and in what the staff, what we've been trying to communicate is that difference between when we can actually sign the contract and when the RTM meets. And when you look at these dates, the RTM does not meet until June 14th, which means we would not be signing a contract until June 15th. So you have a gap from how fast we can open the bids and be able to actually award the contract until we have to wait for the RTM meeting. And I think, you know, I've had a lot of questions over the last week or so about the timing. And, you know, we feel very confident that if we were ready to sign the contract on May 21st, we could reach out to the BET and ask for a special meeting, and you would do that for us very quickly. The RTM is much more complex. And I think that's why the staff have been asking that you consider, and I'm going to ask the same thing I did last week on behalf of North Myannis, that you fund the full estimated amount and condition that the portion that you don't feel comfortable with, so that when we're at that point in May, we could pick up the phone, call the BET, and have a special meeting very quickly and free up those funds to keep us moving forward. So I think this is new information with harder dates for the BET, which I think you were looking for. On this document, we also have a lot more information just about how the classroom usage. If you look at that last page, I had this question as recent as yesterday from the RTM District 2, why we have to even look for alternate space. And so we've tried to just give you a big picture view. And this is not, I could add more to it because my list is about 2.5, 3 pages long, but just to give you an idea of all the displacements that have happened in our elementary schools across the district and why we're going to be looking for alternate space. So that was updated information for you, which I think is very helpful. I might stop there and well, let me just say one more thing before I stop and when we're talking about timeline, and I know I said this last week, every day counts. And it's not only on the front end of this construction project, because right now we know we're expecting that our construction firm is probably going to have materials coming in slower because of COVID. That's what everybody is finding. It also has an impact on the back end of the project, which Dan Watson and I have already started talking about. When we have to go into alternate space, whether that's in the district, out of the district, it doesn't matter where it is. When the project concludes and the building is finished, we then have a rather large move just to get all of those classrooms back into Myanna, North Myannis. The closer that happens to Thanksgiving, the closer that happens to winter break, can easily add another week or 2 weeks to the project because we can't get the moving company scheduled because of those holiday times. So not only can it make a difference on the front end, it can make a difference on the back end because it's a large move to get everybody resettled back to North Myannis. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Mike, if I could follow Tony.
Please do. I was just going to interject something that I thought might help some of this discussion. If you'd like to go first, you may, though.
Or go ahead. I'll wait for you.
So this was more for my closing comments, but let's see if we can check boxes one at a time. Let me just take an opportunity to read a section of an email I received on Tuesday at 12:08 a.m. from the moderator to myself and the moderator pro tem of the RTM. We will, of course, do whatever is necessary to fulfill our obligations, including scheduling a special meeting if necessary. So I think we're here in a special meeting, and you know our commitment, and I've made it very clear to the chair that, you know, we'll do whatever we need to do, and we're doing it now. So I think we have that commitment from the RTM, we have it from the BET. So I think this whole schedule issue is in your hands now. We're just, you can come back to us. You have that commitment. So I think this time delay question and the schedule questions, I think, have been addressed. So I just think that's interesting to know. And several RTM members have, I think, indicated the same thing. And I said, look, the moderator's already committed to us the commitment on their half, and obviously we're all set. So I think that's just an important fact that we throw into the dialogue as we're checking off boxes. Mr. Bernstein?
Thank you, Mike. If I could, that's actually news to us, and thank you for sharing that. It would be nice if actually people were communicating directly rather than indirectly, or through letters to the editor, mind you. You know, there's a bunch of different issues to tackle. One is the scope. I keep hearing the scope getting talked about. The Board of Education unanimously approved the scope of returning the building to the state that it was in. We basically would have to do any code updates that are required for that space. But other than that, we were not interested in taking on other projects and delaying the project at all. If you're listening to that community, the parent community, they've been very clear as well. If you look at the master facility plan, this building originally would have been slated for, I believe, 2035. Given that we've continued to push off elements of that plan, you could push that out at least 2 years. There's really nothing in the work that needs to be done now that would be affected by that long-term plan a decade or more into the future. So the scope is actually very, very clear in terms of what we want to do. There shouldn't be any scope creep. You know, it is really a decision for the Board of Ed as to what we want to do with that building. We've unanimously decided that's what we want to do, and we want to move forward with that expeditiously. I think there is a question about timing, and I think there is a question about process. I think that the discussion that's happened in the paper, rather than at your meetings, which is really disappointing and on many, many levels, is that you're deviating from your longstanding process of allocating money for capital projects subject to condition of release when there's open questions. That is something that you've done time and time again. That is a standard BET practice. I, by the way, have objected to portions of it in the past, especially how certain conditions have been written, but I understand that that is your practice, and I kind of question how we're deviating from that today. So if there's any subversion of the process, it's that you're not actually doing that. You know, every budget cycle, the BET and then the RTM approves the capital budget. On many of those projects, not just school projects, but town projects, the I's are not always dotted, the T's are not always crossed. Things aren't always fully final or approved by the bodies that need to approve them. And yet, somehow, we managed to pass that budget with a lot of conditions. I sat through your budget meetings. I sat through the BET's budget decision day. I heard the conditions you placed on capital projects where you had open questions. This is your practice. We are deviating. I also want to contrast it to the project that you approved at the end of November 2020 for the South Stanwich Road Causeway repair. That was for the DPW project. You actually approved that repair with a large contingency, and timing was certainly an issue because of the reservoir, but that wasn't fully baked at the time you approved it. That was $2.5 million. So why are we saying that a school project is different from that? The school project is an emergency. We are trying to return students to the building where they are going to learn at their best with the rest of their peers, and yet we're holding them to a different standard. You know, there's a lot of other information that's been flying around. I know members have talked about asbestos. If you look at Tony's document, you know, I think we've explained that. No asbestos was found in the ceiling. There were some asbestos tabs holding up a whiteboard that actually, I believe, was remediated this week while no students were in the building. You know, there's a delay that's going to happen here. We need to be honest about that, intellectually honest about that. Any day is a delay, and those delays on the front end will balloon on the back end. As Dr. Jones mentioned, supplies are in short availability at this point. This is the heavy construction season. No contractor is going to go and line up supplies until the contract is signed, meaning they're not going to be able to start work right away. That's a delay on the front end. If we continue to push this, it will be pushed and further down the road in getting those students back to the building. sits with somebody. We are trying to move this process along. I would ask that you appropriate the full amount, that you condition it. I'm comfortable with that. I think you've been comfortable with that previously. And I find what we've done here to be a very big deviation from your standard practice. And I'd ask that you return to doing what you do, which is appropriating the money, conditioning it. We will come back when the bids are in hand.
Thank you. Mr. O'Keefe, did you have anything before I call on the members?
No, I don't. Thank you.
No, I didn't want to forget you. And Dan's not here. All right, let's go to our hands. Ms. Erickson.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Dr. Jones, I wanted to thank you for your memo, and I just have a couple questions on the new information. In preparation for this meeting, I went back and watched the Board of Ed meeting on March 25th. Around 3 hours and 25 minutes into a over 5-hour meeting, you discussed this item. And at the time, Mr. Watson thought it would take 6 to 8 weeks to prepare the drawings to be able to go out for an RF, to post the RFP, would put you more like middle of end of May. I also watched the budget committee meeting. At that time, it was more maybe middle of May. So it seems like you've been able to shave off 2 weeks. So question, I just want to confirm that is the case. That's the new information. And I'd also like the name of the architect that you're working with, and to confirm that the structural engineer is the same firm that did the inspections on North Myanna and the other schools. That's my understanding.
So Kyle Pistola is actually the structural and civil engineer, design engineer. I need to get the architect's name. It's Ryan, but I've just gone blank unless Sean actually has it in front of him. And they are the ones that are actually putting the entire bid package together. And we did have a conversation with them last week, followed up again this week. And then I called again and had another call late yesterday just to make sure that we are very solid on this timeline. I also wanted to ask the question of Pistola, now that half of the building has been demoed, and they can actually see up in the structure. Are they seeing anything structurally right now that could add scope? And as of today, they have not. And so I confirmed that as late as yesterday afternoon, but I can get those, the names of those two people that are
just to follow up, I guess my point is, so that some of the concerns have been the numbers are really sort of back of the envelope. But what I'm hearing from you is they're more than that. They are in consultation with a structural engineer, Werner, and an architect that you're working with, correct?
Werner did the initial estimates, and they are still estimates, but Pistola is actually the one that is really working on putting the building back together. And so they are putting the entire bid package together that will actually go out.
Thank you.
So it is in consultation together.
Mr. Raymer, your hand is up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize that 6 members of this group have already indicated in the press how they intend to vote. I hope there's more flexibility than that makes this dialogue worthwhile. Let's try and have the dialogue anyway. A few points here. First, I'm not sure I fully understand the purpose of the delay in the approval of the other 6 million and small change. A purpose that isn't accomplished by approving the funds and placing a condition on BET acceptance and approval of the bids. The sums that the budget committee approved already includes the demolition of the ceilings. It just doesn't include the repair costs. It was expressed to us by Dan Watson when he was on the line with us that the figures were based upon square footage industry standards. That's pretty good basis for the figures as they are. When we approved just a few days ago the funding, it was at $18.7 million for Eastern Greenwich Civic Center. We didn't have as much detail on the basis for the cost as we're having right now. I think the Stanwich Causeway is probably not a bad example either. The delay surely has consequences. I think you've heard that loud and clear from the community. I'm gratified that the RTM moderator indicates a willingness to have a special meeting to approve these funds. It means that we could approve those funds today, and in someday, just a couple, 3 weeks from now, we could have a special meeting with RTM approval, for example, if they wanted to go by that route. It's important, I think, that one remembers that the June meeting of the RTM is commonly their poorest attended meeting. There's a bonding resolution that accompanies this, and a bonding resolution by our charter requires at least 116, I think I have that figure right, affirmative votes at the RTM to approve. I'm not quite sure what happens if we approve the full funding at the $18.1 million and small change. And then perhaps came back to the bonding resolution later on when there's better attendance at the RTM. I don't know what the experience is, but I would assume that at special meetings of the RTM, the attendance is not very good, making it a little more challenging to achieve the 116 supporting votes. I certainly would expect that that there'd be a strong sentiment in an RTM to approve this item. But I didn't get the strong sentiment of approval here at the BET, so maybe that's not the case. I think if we didn't have a special meeting, it needs to be recognized that if you're to achieve a vote of approval at the June, the June 14th meeting of the RTM, the normal document submission date on that is May 21st. Maybe the moderator would waive that requirement too. I'm not quite sure. I don't know if that was expressed to our chairman, but May 21st is not very far away for the purpose of gathering this information. Again, I'm just not seeing the purpose to be served by the delay. I think the purpose is equally served if we support the full $8.1 million and condition 6,050,000 some odd thousand, the arithmetic difference, conditioning it on approval of the bids when we see it. That would give the school board the opportunity to be moving quickly, as quickly as possible anyway, to get these kids back in the school. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mike, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Mr. Weisbrod's hand was up. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I have two questions for Dr. Jones. One is my understanding, and as I'm reading your letter, there are new facts that are known to you now that you shared through your letter that were not available when the Budget Committee reviewed this matter a couple of weeks ago. I know you've done this a moment ago, but if I could ask you two questions. One, if you could once again summarize the new facts that might help this full BET evaluate the situation. And then the second question is, if you have a sense of the effect of the uncertainty caused by all of these discussions on the school community, be that students at North Myanna, be that the families at North Myanna, the effect that the delays and the debate and frankly, the strife that's in the community on this issue, maybe you have an insight that we don't have that could be useful, that to give us an insight as to what the community is going through as we're experiencing all of this. Those are my two questions. Thank you.
First of all, for the newest information, I think the timeline is probably the most important today that we didn't have in front of you before. And, you've heard us say, especially if you go all the way back to the Board of Ed meeting, it could be 4 weeks, it could be 5 weeks, because you don't want to pressure a firm just to quickly give you a timeline. They have to do the work. They have to have time to do that. We were at that point by the end of last week that, they've been on site. A lot of the building's been demoed, so they're really able to see what's up, all the way to the rafters. So that April 28th RFP date is really important, that we did not have just over a week ago. So it gives everybody a better opportunity to see how the timeline plays out. The walkthrough, the questions submitted, those are all dependent upon when that RFP gets posted. And so I think that is really important information, that we're not waiting another 3 or 4 weeks beyond in order to get that information and get an RFP posted. And that, again, is on page 3 right at the top, if you have the memo in front of you. The other aspect from North Myanna, I think there are a couple of factors. I cannot even begin to tell you how difficult COVID has been on children, on staff, being displaced last spring in full remote, not knowing if families were going to go back, in person in the fall, and just kind of getting your breath and you're back in person. And then this happens. And there was anxiety when this happened that they were perhaps going to not be back in school for the rest of the year. And that was real concern. And, it took us, I think it was almost 2 weeks, trying to figure out, using space inside the district, how we could even move children around. And there's a lot of fallacy out in the community that we have all these empty rooms, and we do not. And especially during COVID, because we have to have the mitigation strategies in place. So finding space was incredibly difficult. So the community went through that as well, which was a lot of high anxiety. I think right now they just want to know that we are all supporting this project. I think the people that are on right now as attendees, most of you know who they are probably. A lot of them are budget watchers. They're highly intelligent people. I think they do understand the process, and that this the funds can be conditioned, which means the school district can't spend them without the respect of the BET and the BET approval. And I think because they do understand the process, that's what they're asking for, to provide that comfort that we're going to move as fast as we can to get children back in the building. And I just think it's these are little kids, they're little ones, and we want to get everybody back in the building as quickly as we can with no delays. And I think that really kind of sums it up, that they want to be back as a school community, because it's been a very difficult, it will be really a year and a half, and longer than that if you're going to add next fall, depending on how long this project takes. So I hope I answered that for you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Ms. Cruiser's hand is up next.
Yes, hi, good morning. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion. Is now the appropriate time?
What is your motion?
My motion is to approve the full $8,109,027 of appropriation, of which $2,055,000 is immediately available, and $6,054,027 is conditioned, subject to BET review and approval of project bids.
Seconded.
I won't accept the second to that. So if I may, Ms. Cruiser, if I may suggest, your motion is to amend ED 11 from an amount of $2,055,000 to the number you're talking about. And you could put the intent would be to add a condition or condition or subject to release to that. That would be, that motion would be in order. And if you so move that and get a second, we'll have a discussion on that.
I second that motion.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Raymer. Is everybody clear? Ms. Cruiser's, I fully understand what she's doing, but in proper order, we have a motion before us. So her motion is really to amend and bring the dollar threshold from X to Y. And the condition would be a motion to follow after that, after we dispense of that. So if everyone's all clear with that, and Mr. Raymer seconded, discussion on the item. Ms. Erickson's hand is up. I'm sorry, Ms. Cruiser, it's your motion. Actually, you should go first.
Sure. Thank you. So I've obviously been listening very carefully to the professionals charged with the well-being of these nearly 500 5 to 11-year-old children at North Myanna School. And I've been paying particularly close note to the fact sheet that we received and that Dr. Jones just once again walked us through all the details and all the new information we have. And that lays out in great detail that there's almost certain probability of delays if we had multiple pauses for deliberation amongst multiple bodies here in town along the way. I've also been listening very carefully to the North Myanna's families. We received a letter yesterday with 333 signatures. I understand that's almost 80% of the North Myanna's community. And as a parent of 2 young children myself, I can certainly sympathize with their anxiety and relief about really what could have been their added stress dealing with the logistics of the fallout of what did happen, many having their young children in multiple locations, and the worry about the toll that all of this has on their children's learning and overall well-being. And of course, we've talked about it, but we're in the middle of a pandemic, and there's been little normalcy for kids, parents, and staff alike. Routine is paramount to a child's sense of security, which of course has impacts on their learning and their emotional health. They are craving the comfort of their little community, and I'm sure we can all sympathize with that. Why we would needlessly delay, I'm unsure. I've also looked back at some of the more recent Board of Ed emergency appropriations that have come before us. And so I myself was not part of the BET. I was in the RTM at the time, but I wanted to understand what our protocols were and what precedence was. So whether it was the Greenwich High School Science Room, the Greenwich Performing Arts, or most notably the Coscob water damage in 2018, I was struck by 4 themes when those appropriations came before this board. Number one, the BET moved very quickly in its decision. Number 2, the costs presented were all estimates. Number 3, there were no conditions placed. And number 4, there were no dissenting votes at either the budget committee or at full BET for any of those. Now you can say that North Myanna is obviously a much larger dollar magnitude, which is why I'm assuming my colleagues are making the push to alter recent precedent for Board of Ed emergency requests. However, I'm hoping that the compromise to help pacify their discomfort would be a condition, as I mentioned, that would make 2 million of the total ask available for immediate use, as was passed in the budget committee, with the remainder subject to the Board of Ed coming again before us to ensure the balance of the appropriation is based on harder numbers. And I believe with this proposed amendment, we are fulfilling our role as stewards of town finances while moving expeditiously like we've done the Board of Ed emergencies in the past, reducing inefficiencies, which we all state is one of our goals, and execution risk for our professionals, and of equal importance, if not more, is supporting our friends and neighbors in the North Myanna's community. And so I'm very hopeful my colleagues will support this compromise and show our town that we can work together to help rather than hinder within our community.
Thank you. Ms. Erickson's hand is up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo 100% what my colleague Miriam Cruiser just said. And I wanted to go back to the point of the RTM having the ability to weigh in on this discussion, which I think is very, very important. The fact of the matter is, it is on their call. It's on their call for Monday night, April 19th. Committees have already met and deliberated on the full 8.1 million. By advancing this to the RTM, they will have that full dialogue. Whether or not they can hold a special meeting between their meeting on April 19th, their budget meeting is off the table, as I understand it. End of May is Memorial Day, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little too much uncertainty for my comfort. So I do believe the RTM will have the ability to weigh in on Monday night if this board advances the full appropriation with the condition that Ms. Cruiser just outlined. I fully support the amendment and I urge my colleagues to do so.
Thank you. Ms. Moriarty, your hand is up.
Yes, I just wanted to add a few additional comments, and they reinforce many of the things that you've already heard. First, some of the discussion that I've heard is around the scope of the project. I think the Board of Ed, both through the administration and the action of the full board, has been very clear on the scope they expect for this project, which is to restore the building and to get the children back in that building as quickly as possible. Some of the comments about expanding the scope concern me only because there isn't a good process for communicating that. The Board of Ed is already acting on one particular scope and moving down that path. Let's say some members of this board believe the scope should be expanded. your only recourse at this point is to turn down any appropriation. And then the project lays in limbo and there's not sure what happens. So I'm confused by that. I think we have a recommendation from our Board of Education and the administration, and we need to move forward on that path. Secondly, the issue about conditioning our funds, it is a common practice when we are uncertain about some of the details. We just approved a budget which had, I believe, 9 conditions in it to get additional information. It is consistent. Third, the RTM, if it is not comfortable approving the entire 8.1 million and giving the BET the authority to determine the right dollar amounts based on the project bids, then they can reduce the appropriation at their April meeting. I think that for the BET to only give them a limited appropriation is taking the RTM's authority away from them to be able to opine on this project. And so I think it's important for this board to support the initiative of getting the children back in that building as quickly as possible, given the uncertainty that they have now, the experiences they've had in the past year with COVID. And I think we need to support our administration as well. And I realize that they are our employees. However, they have been executing at such a high level this year with all of the challenges in front of them. And so to ask them to attend at least an additional 6 more meetings to justify a project when we've had the discussions today, in a time frame where you're assuming the RTM will organize itself to meet between its May meeting and its June meeting, which is very unusual. They often have special meetings during a period of a wider gap than that. And the RTM, it's not just one meeting, it's at least 3 meetings for each of its members. So if they have the ability to weigh in onto this issue in April, I think we should give them the ability to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weisbrod, your hand is up, followed by Mr. Drake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This whole discussion about the RTM is confusing to me, and I'm sure is even more confusing to the community. It's my understanding the RTM has already weighed in on this matter. It's my understanding that the RTM Finance Committee has voted 12-0 to approve the $8 million requested, subject to the BET doing its normal due diligence, excruciating due diligence, which we should do to review the dollar amounts under the funding. So the whole discussion about the RTM involvement to me seems confusing at best. On the one hand, you have enormous anxiety, enormous stress, enormous challenge, as delineated so well by Dr. Jones. On the other hand, there is this extremely convoluted discussion about the RTM and getting the RTM involved and so forth. The RTM has been involved. The RTM has opined. The RTM has reviewed. So I find it extremely puzzling. I really have to say, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weisbrod. Mr. Drake? You're muted, Mr. Drake. You're muted. There you go.
Let's get the North Myanna's repair underway. That's the title of our article in today's Greenwich Sentinel. Our article in yesterday's Greenwich Time was entitled, North Myanna's will be fully funded. Repairs to the school have unanimous support on this board. Everyone wants the students back in the school as fast as possible. I certainly do. I learned to read in the building. We've moved quickly to schedule this special meeting today to fund the repair. The RTM has also indicated it's ready to act. We're going to appropriate $2.1 million to advance the project, and we have an amendment now to add an additional $6 million. That additional appropriation is simply not ready. Our longstanding practice is to appropriate taxpayers' money in a manner that's thorough and careful. And our duty to taxpayers is to obtain an accurate evaluation of the work by an architect or engineer. Well, the support for this additional $6 million, let me read it. Estimated value plus or minus 16,070 square feet times $312 per square foot based on current new school construction costs. That sentence is what we have to go on. It's preliminary. If we approve this very rough estimate, we're signaling to the contractors that they should set their prices to capture every bit of this preliminary estimate, which is not the way to manage a project. Today, we're also considering appropriating this estimate of 6 million and releasing it at a later meeting. The proposed delay in that proposal is a confirmation that the appropriation isn't ready today. You know, this board has never allocated capital in such a preliminary manner. This is not the time to waive our duty to be thorough and careful with the citizens' money. If there were a genuine health emergency and your family and the GEMS ambulance came, you wouldn't want to see them waive their policy of being thorough and careful just because we're in a hurry. And we won't do it either. You know, we assume goodwill and good intent on all sides. Dr. Jones and her staff are doing a conscientious job with integrity, and that job deserves our respect. Repair of the North Myanna School has unanimous support on this board. Let's get the work started.
Okay, I see no further hands. Ms. Crumick's hand is up.
Yeah, I am concerned by the trend to delay and defer requests from the Board of Education and the Greenwich Public Schools administrators for appropriations. And in this case, there is a clear emergency, and their community is asking, it's pretty simple, approve the appropriation on an expedited basis so work can be completed in time for students to return to school. Now, you can discuss process, you can discuss estimates, but at the end of the day, what we're doing here, if we don't appropriate it now, and we can put in the conditions, if we don't do it now, we are going to delay. We are going to push it back, and it is going to have an impact. And you can present a rationale for why you don't want to move forward, but it appears that there is just obstruction being put forward here, rather than simply supporting what the professional educators, the professional construction managers, the professional engineers and architects are encouraging us to do. So I would ask that we fully appropriate at this time. If we need to put the condition on to make some of you more comfortable, I frankly have respect for these professionals, and I'd like them to be given the opportunity to do this in as expeditious a fashion as possible. We owe it to the North Myanna students and to the community.
Thank you. Ms. Vassilides' hand is up.
I take exception to the word obstruction. I take the exception to the word delay. Right now, we're looking to approve monies to have the BOE go through their demolition, architectural drawings, and allow for a qualified estimate as to the full cost of the total repair and preventative remediation. This will mean that the BOE will need to come back to the BET and ultimately the RTM for an interim appropriation once the total costs are known. Will the BET actions delay the timeline forwarded by the BOE? Let's face it, the BOE timeline is an aggressive timeline, and it is hoped that it can be achieved. I hope it can be achieved. However, in no way will the BET or RTM be delaying factors that haven't even occurred yet. And you know, I just find it ridiculous, quite frankly, that we are being called obstructionists, and we are being called people that are delaying. Hold on a second. That we are delaying a project that hasn't even begun yet. So both the RTM and the BET have the ability to schedule special meetings within the timeline required. Both the chair of the BET and the moderator of the RTM have indicated that they are willing to hold a special meeting if need be. There is no delay here. There is no obstruction here. It's a process that we've followed in the past, and we should continue doing so.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Hess, your hand is up
Hi, so,
on
you
the
know,
motion to increase the amount of the appropriation.
so I fully support the funding of North Myannis. I support a lot of what's been said in terms of the importance of the students and getting them back in school. But I also support the process, and my concern about an estimate that's square footage times cost with a condition, you're coming back to us anyway. And if we were to do a condition and you have to go over, we'd have to go back to the RTM anyway. And I don't feel comfortable circumventing the RTM. I think that they have a right to know what the costs are here. So there's no, when I'm looking at this timeline, the only new information I saw today, yes, I saw the timeline, but no new information surrounding the piece of information that I was most uncomfortable with, which is the square footage times the cost. That number, that information is the same as what was available prior to this memo a few days ago. And I look at the timeline, no one says you have to wait until June to come back to the BET and the RTM. If you can, I apologize, if you can firm up that number and have a tighter estimate, then you can come back and we can approve that other amount anytime in May and well in advance so that you can stay on the timeline that you want to do. It doesn't need to be sequential. So I would encourage us to follow process here, do the right thing, be accountable on both sides, and do what's right for the community and for the children. And, you know, stop with the, you know, the name calling and the being obstructionist and this and that. We all want the same thing. We all care about these kids. And quite frankly, I know all too well what COVID is doing to the students and the children of our community. So let's do the right thing here, please, and do it with integrity, like we teach our children in our schools, okay? Let's hold our head up high and do things and do it together and stop all this nonsense, please. Thank you.
Ms. Erickson, you've spoken on this motion. I will call on you, and then I was calling on the vote on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually going to say one comment and then call the question. The comment is, I appreciate everyone's thoughtful dialogue today. It's clear we're at an impasse. It's clear that, you know, we're more, you know, I don't think we're hearing what needs to be heard. So I'd call the question.
Well, I would say we don't usually call the question on each other. Mr. Drake, before I call the vote, I just a thought comes to mind, and this is just a simple for, with all the other angst, and I'll have some comments later, but what happens if we appropriate 6.1 and they need 6.4? They're coming back anyway, number one. Number two, why do we want to put an open appropriation on the street to negotiate against ourselves? Why do we do that? We don't do that. We're putting out a statement, in a public statement, that we want to spend $6.1 million on a project, whatever the project is, a fire truck, this building. Why do we want to work against our own numbers in the public? We don't do that. And that's why we follow the process. And in this particular case, I have no idea what this project's going to be. I don't know what the scope's going to be. Everybody's on board. We all know that. We're later comments. Mr. Drake, if you would call the roll, and the motion is to amend ED 11, and I'm going to say everything is identical other than the dollar amount, which is on the agenda. And that number is raised from 2055 000 to 8.1 even, is I think what Ms. Cruiser's motion was, 8.1 million even.
Mine actually gave the full amount, which is $8,109,027.
Thank you. Mr. Drake, do you have that?
Yes, I do. $8,109,027. So this is Ms. Cruiser's amendment to increase the appropriation to that amount. Ms. Cruiser,
Yes.
Ms. Hess,
No.
Ms. Crummey,
Enthusiastically, yes.
Ms. Moriarty,
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington,
No.
Mr. Mason.
No.
I'm a no. Ms. Vasiliotis,
No.
Mr. Raymer,
Yes.
Mr. Deuce,
No.
Mr. Weisbrod,
Yes.
Ms. Erickson,
Yes.
That item fails 6-6.
Okay, that brings us back to the original item on the agenda, ED11. Discussion on that item. I'm seeing no hands up. Erickson's hand is up.
Sorry, Mr. Mason, I actually have a technical question. It relates to this being coming from the B fund, and it sort of relates to the next motion. As I understand it, we don't bond for projects that are going to be reimbursed by insurance. And if you look at this, most of this will be in fact reimbursed by insurance, except for the third and fourth lines on the chart, which is about a little over $600,000. So I guess my question for Pete is, would it make sense to not finance this from the bond fund right now, postpone the bonding resolution until we have the full amount of the appropriation? Again, sorry, it's a little technical.
No, I want to say, Ms. Erickson, that question is spot on. I've had the same question with the budget director, but Peter or Roland, whoever wants to answer that.
A couple answers. First, I thought you said that the majority of it was going to be covered by insurance. I don't think that's correct. I think the insurance number is around $1 million of the 8 million. But
I'm sorry, I'm talking about of the 2055, which is now before us.
Okay. If you choose bonding, you use the B fund. If you choose to take the monies out of the capital non-recurring, you use the Z fund. This will come up later when you vote on the bonding resolution. You're going to vote on a funding source, okay? So if you decide to appropriate 2 million, you need a funding source. You could fund that entirely from the capital non-recurring and at a future date, change your mind and borrow the money. But as far as the 2 million, if you bond it to 2 million, you have to net out the insurance proceeds. And I think that was your question.
That's right. So I guess my question is, I think I would prefer to identify the financing sources from the Z fund and then have the prerogative at a later date, once the full figures are known, to do the bonding resolution and adjust accordingly. Mr. Mason, does that comport with your thinking?
Ms. Erickson, I have had that thought, and I'll say it again. Let me try this one more time. We're probably, looking at Dr. Jones's timeline, we're probably 4 weeks to the qualified numbers and a contingency and what have you. What happens, Peter? Try that one more time, Mr. Menarski. What happens if we don't approve a bonding resolution? It's funded. It'll obviously come either out of general fund or capital non-recurring. That's not an issue. But at that time, can we then do a bonding resolution then instead of having all these multiple bonding resolutions, can we do a bonding resolution then leave out the estimated insurance proceeds?
When you get to the F Finance 6 on the agenda, you need to have a funding source. Okay, and to Laura's point, if you vote on this, you're voting also on a project number in a fund. If you're voting on the B fund, you're voting on a bonding source. If you're voting on the capital non-recurring as a source, a funding source, it comes from the Z fund. Do you agree, Roland? Where's Roland? Yeah.
Yes, but in the past, we bonded the entire project. For example, a school construction project where it's $30 million, and we know we're going to get X number of million from the state. We have a bonding authorization for the full $30 million, but we won't bond the full amount because when it comes time to bonding, we'll have the proceeds from the state. So we'll only end up bonding 25 million, for example. So in this case, we'd have a $2 million bonding resolution, and we're only going to end up bonding $1 million because $1 million is coming from insurance. So that's not unusual, but you can go either way, like capital non-recurring or the bonding authorization.
Okay, Ms. Erickson, I think I'm okay with that explanation. Are you?
I think that's fine. I just think, we're confusing the issue a little bit. Maybe we could make it simpler, but I'll go along with it.
Yeah, I agree. Mr. Raymer's hand is next.
So worth mentioning that the item before us, unless it were amended, is for it to come from the B fund to be bonded. And it is for it to be at the full $2,055,000. Secondly, it's worth mentioning that before the budget committee, which were figures as of the middle of March, I believe, as of the 19th of March, we were told that the anticipated, I think that's an operative word, anticipated insurance is $1,176,134. At least that was quoted to us at the time that we were before the budget committee. I don't know if that's still the figure, but maybe that's useful for the board to know that. And I just wanted to share those things. The last thing I wanted to say is that at the vote on this item, this $2 million item, I'll vote in favor of it. That's because I want to be sure at least that funding is available. That doesn't mean that I'm not disappointed that the motion to amend was rejected.
Okay. Just, I want to add on to this bonding and insurance, because I think they're tied together with certainly the next appropriation. I think as the schools progress and I'll make this comment later, and they really get not only the bids, but they start getting a timeline for the length of work of the project, whatever, based on the scope. I think Megan had said to us that there are still qualifying costs of transportation and what have you, moving of equipment and supplies that are still insurable. So I think the insurance number, although I agree with Mr. Raymer, the number that you offered was what we heard at the budget committee, but I think that insurance number may go up with time. I'm not sure, but I think that will go up, and we'll recognize it at that time as well. Ms. Tarkington, your hand is up.
I just wanted to also add, I think it may have been covered, that when we do our other school projects, we bond each and every tranche with the bonding resolution, but we are, Mr. Minarski tracks all of this and is careful to make sure that whether it's from insurance proceeds or whether it's from state education funds going to reimburse the town, that we never bond those particular sources. So, I think there's a process in place, and this is consistent, and we've never veered from that. I guess what I'm more concerned about is if we take part of this project and put it in one fund, and then when the $6.1 million comes in from the other fund, how do we begin to blend that? And that kind of, creates a concern for me from a financial standpoint.
Thank you. Okay. Seeing no further discussions, I'll make some comments before I ask Mr. Drake to call the roll. As the last speaker, I just want to offer the following. It's been a long couple weeks in town, maybe even longer. This incident happened on February 13th. We're doing everything we can in this community. But seeing these emails and scaring parents and offering that the kids are going to be in school in September, December, nobody knows. It's just unknown. And putting out a narrative in the town of just getting everyone so upset. This is the 5th school that's going out of service unexpectedly. This is the 5th time we've had to deal with this. Funny thing about that is that 3 of those incidents were from new construction, not old buildings. Hamilton Avenue, the high school, Science Wing. It's just, we're not doing our community any good. I heard the word anxiety by the superintendent of schools. I agree. Nobody's here trying to create anxiety. We're trying to follow our normal practices the best we can. Everyone in this town knows we're going to fund this project. We might not know what the scope of the project is, other than we know what roofs and stuff have to be repaired. Everybody's funding this project. Everybody knows that. Everybody's willing to do meetings, okay? I would say this entire mess, in my opinion, is over a delay, a dreaded delay, which I say was induced. It was a perception of a delay. No, can I be the only person in this government that sends an email to the moderator and say, look, we have some schedule challenges. What can we do here? Am I the only one that did that? I doubt it. I think everybody should have done that. Okay. We have no delay. Okay. We're sitting at a special meeting. We'll have another meeting. As far as I'm concerned, I'll leave a thought, and then I'll address some of the comments. Dr. Jones, since our budget committee has offered a new timeline, great, fantastic. We didn't have it. Thank you, Ms. Moriarty, for bringing her up and letting her explain that. It's better to have communication on any project. I have no problem with her timeline. I don't think we do, nor do I think the RTM does. Let's get this commitment in place. Let's get this money. We're all here to do what we need to do to the next step. They got to go. It's up to them. They're telling us what they're going to do. Put the resources in place and let them do that. But we have to be respectful. I would say the RTM Education Committee voted to cut the 8.1 down to 7 something. I was on the meeting. I'm not sure what their logic was. It had something to do with contingency, but they have their motion. I'm not following that. Our BOE chair seems to be unhappy with the process and the BET. Well, that's a dialogue I think that's been going on for a while, and that's sort of getting stale, and it's time to move forward. And I can't help if people are unhappy with the way our government works. Change the government if that's what some want to do. Mr. Raymer, I promise I will send your comments to the RTM about their attendance and your worry about their attendance. And I'm pretty sure right now that'll be well received over there, averaging about 99% at their meetings. So we're probably going to have this all wrapped up in 4 or 5 weeks. As far as what we're done, we'll get this project going, and it's all going to work out. This community is not benefiting by just creating anxiety. We're following a process. That's all this is about. It's very simple. Dr. Jones, I cannot tell you, I can't imagine what this COVID school year has been like. I've seen the hardships and everything. We've done a wonderful job. You've led the state of Connecticut getting kids in school all the time. And then you had this school issue happen. Nobody wanted this. We'll get through it. This is what we do. This is Greenwich. We're better than this. We shouldn't be having these kind of dialogues, and we should just be moving on. So I appreciate everybody's time, and I'm going to call the roll. Mr. Drake, would you?
Mr. Mason, now we're voting on ED 11 and then later on the bonding, isn't that right?
Well, yes, we have to move the bonding resolution, but let's vote on ED 11.
Okay, on ED 11, Ms. Cruiser,
I abstain.
Ms. Hess,
Yes.
Ms. Crummey,
Yes.
Ms. Moriarty,
I would like the Board of Education to have some money, but I can't support this lower funding, so I'm voting to abstain.
Ms. Tarkington,
Yes.
Mr. Mason.
Of course, yes.
I'm a yes. Ms. Fastiotis,
Yes.
Mr. Raymer,
As I stated before, I'm voting yes because it's the path that at least produces the least likelihood of delay.
Mr. Deuce,
Yes.
Mr. Weisbrod,
Yes.
Ms. Erickson.
Abstain.
This item passes 9 votes in favor, none opposed, and 3 abstentions.
Thank you. That brings us to our next item on the agenda, FI-6. Ms. Tarkington, would you get that item before us, please?
Yes. FI6 is coming from the Finance Department. It's $2,055,000. The purpose is for a borrowing resolution for the North Myanna school flood.
Okay, that item is coming on behalf of our Budget Committee. Can I get a committee report on that, please?
Yes, the bonding resolution prepared by Town Council Robinson and Cole authorizes issuance of bonds to meet a portion of the capital budget appropriations for the repair of the ceiling at North Myanna School. The Budget Committee approved the resolution by a vote of 3-0-1. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let me just lower my screen share and go back to Mr. Raymer's hand is up.
I wonder if through you, Mr. Chairman, I can ask the controller or the budget director a question. And that is, what would be the consequence to the progress of this if, despite the fact that the appropriation was approved, if there was not sufficient support at the RTM at a vote on the resolution to give this resolution the 116 votes? Would it delay the project if that resolution were brought up again at a later date, such as in September?
You have you've voted on an appropriation to spend. You could spend up to $2,055,000. You need now a funding source. So normally, when you do bonding resolutions as interims, you don't actually get the money until the subsequent January when you do the borrowing. So at this point, you wouldn't have a funding source. And the alternatives would be general fund, capital non-recurring fund, or the B fund if there's a subsequent bonding resolution.
Is the, just to follow up, Mr. Chairman,
Please.
is then the bottom line of that, is that the project could go forward at least to the extent of the $2,055,000, that likely a failure of the RTM to be able to muster the 116 votes, apparently then, I think I'm hearing, would not delay the progress of the project?
No, let me rephrase that, Eric. You have the authority right now to spend $2,055,000. It sounds like you're ultimately going to need somewhere around 8 million plus or minus. So you're going to need a future appropriation, and you're going to need a funding source.
Okay, thank you.
But the answer is no, it's not going to delay it.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Moriarty's hand is up.
Yes, just to ask a follow-up question to the controller through the chair. We, during our budget deliberations, we considered using funds from capital non-recurring as part of a funding source just for the operating and our capital tax levy. Because our capital non-recurring is up at $9 million, it's typically there for emergencies. Does it cause a problem to you if today, let's say we decided to use the capital non-recurring as a source of funding for this portion of the project? However, when the full amount is known and we vote on an additional appropriation to bond that portion of the project?
Is your question is to ultimately spend $8 million out of the capital non-recurring?
No, the question would be to spend the 2 million. We'll forget the insurance proceeds for the moment, but to spend 2 million out of capital non-recurring and 6 million bonded. We can split projects in terms of their source of funding. Is that correct?
You can do that, but you would have to amend this motion. Yes, there's no problem with that.
Okay. And in your opinion, is there a problem with using capital non-recurring today as a source of these funds?
No, no problem.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Erickson, your hand is up.
Yes, sorry. I just want to clarify. So we have the 2,055,000 today. We have a future appropriation of 6 million plus. And then in all likelihood, we'll have a third appropriation for whatever the cost is for the plan to house the students in the fall of 2021, if I'm not mistaken, because that has not been accounted for in these estimates. So I'm just wondering if, again, on the theory of let's keep it simple, would it make more sense to identify the funding sources from the Z fund and figure this out at a later date?
Well, I don't see anybody rushing to answer that question for you. Peter, I'm thinking like Ms. Erickson is thinking on this. I think we're going to see this item at least two more times, maybe even a third time, because again, I think once the more they know about the real timeline for actual physical work, I think that'll determine what their plans are for housing and transportation, everything like that. But I don't know how long the insurance will run on that. I don't know what the timeline. I guess that's probably a conversation for Megan, in who handles all these insurance claims and stuff. I don't have that answer. Ms. Crumick's hand is up.
Yeah, I just was wondering if the motion that is on the floor for the bonding could be replaced with a motion to fund from the capital non-recurring account at this point, and then consider bonding down the road. But it just seems premature for the amount that is being approved at this point to commence the construction project. But I'm not sure who would have to withdraw the motion, whether it's.
Well, the items before us from the budget committee. So Ms. Vassilis, your hand is up.
Yeah, just a question again to Pete from you. If we decide to fund this from the Z fund, could we then go back and bond for the full amount of whatever it is that occurs? I'm just a little unclear as to where we're going here.
If the B fund is used for bonded projects.
Correct.
The Z fund is used for capital projects that are not bonded.
Right.
You collectively, the majority of you voted to bond this through the B fund. If you change your mind, you'd have to amend your ED 11 and charge it to the Z fund. To answer Laura's question and Leslie's previous questions, you could have as a funding source the capital non-recurring at this point for the 2 million less the insurance. And then you can go at a future date and bond the additional 6 million plus any additional cost if you exceed the total of 8 million.
Okay, so my question.
Go ahead.
My question though is that if we do take this out of capital non-recurring, we couldn't go back and then bond for it because we've already spent the money out of capital non-recurring.
You could change your mind. You're not gonna bond for years. You're going to in January borrow it through a bond anticipation note. And then you do a second year bond anticipation note and a third year. So the bonding question doesn't take place for 3 years. You could change your mind technically. If you wanted to change your mind on say it's $1 million, $1 million's insurance and $1 million is capital bonded, and you change your mind, you could go back and change it and take the money out of the capital non-recurring at this point.
Okay, so in other words, it doesn't preclude us in the future from bonding the $1 million, let's say, if we wanted to, for whatever reason. I just wanted to know what our options were.
Technically, you can change your mind all the way up until 3 years from now when you actually permanently bond the money.
Got it.
Because a bond anticipation note is a temporary financing which could be paid for with cash or permanently bonded.
Okay, so then that makes the argument just pass the bonding resolution and then either modify it as we add to the project.
Correct.
That's the answer to your question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Raymer, you're here.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry. Maybe I misunderstood. I thought the control fund and later on change our mind and with a fresh motion switch that and bond it without difficulty. But what the chair was just saying now was the opposite, I think, and that was to approve it for the with a bonding resolution and then amend in the other direction later on to change it to the Z fund if we like. I don't know where the rest of the body is on that. My concern about that again is that at the moment that you're passing this from the B fund and you then have a bonding resolution, you're then going to have a problem. You then potentially could have a problem with whether or not you're able to raise the 116 votes at the RTM. Again, I mentioned that typically the attendance at the June meeting is a bit less than at the other meetings. I don't mean to tread on any toes at the RTM, but I think statistically that's a fact that the attendance at the June meeting is a bit less. And secondly, I would assume, although I don't know, I haven't had the experience, I would assume that the attendance would be somewhat less at a special meeting of the RTM. It's important that everybody recognize that the 116 votes isn't just a question of the majority of the number of RTM members who are attending a particular meeting. It's a requirement that there be affirmative votes from a majority of the full membership of the RTM, whether attending the meeting or not. And I'm thinking that it might be better than that we have a motion to reconsider the motion we just passed to switch the funding source to the Z fund instead of the B fund. I'd be curious what's the view of my colleagues on that.
So Mr. Raymer, first of all, I want to speak for the controller. The controller's saying if you don't pass the bonding resolution, then you should go and revise your prior application to have a funding source. What the controller's saying is if you approve the bonding resolution, you have up to 3 years to decide if you want to bond this or not. That means as soon as we start spending money, that they'll be spending out of the general fund, out of fund balance. And as time goes by, we can decide to add more that we need to borrow for the additional requests that come on this, or we could choose to decide not to borrow it at a later date and just take a portion, as Ms. Moriarty is saying, other than the insurance proceeds, out of capital non-recurring. To me, we do the bonding resolution on this one and just keep it consistent. As much as I'm not a fan of interim borrowing resolutions, but on this particular, this is what will probably be a large number. So that's where I stand on that. So that's my opinion. And I don't think there's detriment either way. I go back to a comment Mr. Weisbrot said, a lot of RTM conversations here tonight. And that's, you know, we send them what's their part in all of this. And that's what we do. Ms. Fassler, your hand is up again.
Sorry, as a point of order, Mr. Chairman, it might be worth reminding the body that on a bonding resolution by charter, it requires 7 affirmative votes here at the BET.
Correct. Okay.
Just a quick comment to Jeff's, you know, with Zoom, the RTM has had record attendance. So I would anticipate that they would have, again, I can't speak for the RTM, and neither can you, Jeff, but you know, I think the past history is not necessarily a portent of the future history.
Mike, you're on mute.
How did that happen? Ms. Moriarty, your hand is up. I'm sorry. How did I do that?
Yeah, I'm not sure this is going to help people in the conversation. Clearly, we can do this either way. We have the funds and capital non-recurring to cover this particular part of the project. We will not have enough in the capital non-recurring for the whole project. Typically, when we send something to the RTM, we don't change our mind on the funding source. So when we talk about process, if we were to vote this out of the cash portion, capital non-recurring, and wanted to change it to bonding later, we do have a larger explanation to the RTM when they're need to vote on a bonding authorization for a project that's not in front of them. We'll change a dollar amount. So it's not as easy. I am looking at our capital non-recurring as being larger than it needs to be. We did not address that in the budget process. You know, so I think we can go either way on this. I think it might be easier to vote to have this come out of capital non-recurring and then to vote the second part of this project out of the bonding fund. Just because I think then the money's coming out of the pots, the pools and the sources that we would intend them to come from. Thanks.
Okay, so our vote will decide what our next actions are going to be. Mr. Drake, on
we're voting on
timeout, whatever this item is on
FI6. Thanks. Okay. FI6, and it's as presented in your meeting materials. Who started the other end of the table that we're not sitting at? Ms. Erickson.
Yes.
Mr. Weisbrot.
Yes.
Mr. Deuce.
Yes.
Mr. Raymer.
Yes.
Ms. Fasiotis.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Mr. Mason.
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington.
Yes.
Ms. Moriarty.
No.
Ms. Crummey.
Yes.
Ms. Hess.
Yes.
Ms. Cruiser.
I abstain.
That item passes 10-1-1.
Thank you. Before I call a motion for adjournment, Mr. Minarski, Mr. Geiger, there's another dialogue. We are going to need to send, I'm going to need to put a package together to send to the moderator and moderator pro tem on these two resolutions as passed today. Could I ask you if you could put that together for us and send that to Karen, Leslie Moriarty, and I, please. And I want to forward that over so they have it coming from us, because we're not going to probably be there to move this on Monday night. So I'm going to have to ask the moderator to do it on behalf, because we're meeting at the same time. So I think that's important. And we'll get a copy of all of that to everybody here so we know what we're sending them. So just so we know.
Today being Friday, that's hustling. You're right.
Yes. Today's Friday. We have to hustle on this a little bit. I just think that's important, and it's part of these items. Ms. Erickson, your hand is up.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, so the substitute resolution on Monday night in front of the RTM is coming from the full BET. Is that the purpose of this communication?
That is exactly it. The item that's on the RTM call, we didn't put that there. The Board of Ed put that there, and there's dialogue about that. But I just want to make sure we deliver our mail to them in a timely fashion so they have it for circulation, and so they're ready to go for that. So, Ms. Vassilotis, Ms. Moriarty, I'll enjoy a little bit of help and input on putting that together if we can do that after this meeting. Thank you, everyone. And Monday night is our regular meeting. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So seconded.
Mr. Raymer seconded it. I think Ms. Hess made the motion. All those in favor?
Aye. It was Ms. Cruiser that made the motion.
Oh,
Not me.
sorry.
That's
Thank
okay.
you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See everybody Monday.